comme véhicule de la science, comme véhicule du savoir.
Since after 50 years of independence, we have been talking about the use of African languages in the areas of science.
Et puis, il n'y a rien qui vient. Il y a quelques initiatives un peu partout en Afrique pour introduire les langues africaines dans l'enseignement, mais ça s'arrête au plus à l'école primaire ou quelques classes du secondaire.
But so far, this discussion has not been productive. We have not found any, no scientific works have not been written in native African languages. At the most, you will find pedagogical texts at the level of elementary school, but nothing further.
Pourtant, déjà, depuis 1976, les chefs d'État et de gouvernement africains réunis sur l'île Maurice avaient déjà préconisé l'utilisation de ces langues-là dans toutes les sphères, non seulement dans l'éducation, mais dans toutes les sphères de la vie publique, pour permettre aux peuples africains d'avoir toute leur autonomie, non seulement l'autonomie politique, mais également l'autonomie linguistique qui accompagne l'autonomie politique.
And this is despite the fact that in 1976, in Mauritius, African presidents have advocated for the use of African languages in the area of science and also in the public sphere in order to promote political autonomy for African people.
Sur le plan intellectuel, les écrivains et hommes de science ont aussi eu leur part. Il y a eu par exemple l'appel de Frantz Fanon dans Konoamas Plan.
In the area of, in the intellectual sphere, also many writers have voiced their opinions. We can begin with Frantz Fanon.
Yeah. Qui demandait vraiment une décolonisation radicale, c'est-à-dire l'abandon de toutes les structures qui continuaient de maintenir les peuples africains dans une certaine dépendance par rapport à leurs anciens maîtres, à leurs anciens
colonisateurs. Frantz Fanon asked for a complete relinquishing of all structures that kept African people dependent on their previous colonizers.
Et il a été suivi en cela par Ngugi wa Thiong'o, par exemple, qui dans son ouvrage Decolonizing the Mind.
And then he was followed by Ngugi wa Thiong'o in his work entitled Decolonizing the Mind.
Demandait également non seulement un abandon des langues d'utilisation des langues occidentales, mais également une réforme sur le plan de la pensée et de la production.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o was a proponent for the abandonment of colonial language, what was considered colonial languages, and the total use of African languages, but also he called for a reformation of ways of thinking.
Il a décidé même de poursuivre sa carrière littéraire en écrivant désormais en Gikuyu, sa langue maternelle.
And he pursued his writing career, a creative writing career, by producing texts in his native language, which is Kikuyu.
Et je voudrais bien citer ici Alioune Diop, qui...
I would like to quote Alioune Diop.
Qui disait notamment, il n'est pas d'expression adéquate de la sensibilité africaine.
Says that there is no adequate or appropriate expression of African sensibilities.
Avec les seules ressources des mots.
With solely with words.
Rythme et image d'une langue européenne.
Solely with the words and the rhythm of European languages.
L'origine de cette langue dans le temps et dans l'espace.
The origins of this language in time and space
l'empêche de traduire et respecter le style de notre pensée et de notre âme.
Prevents the European language from respecting our soul.
Alors, au regard de tout cela, on se rend compte à quel point la situation des pays africains aujourd'hui dépend beaucoup plus de leur situation linguistique que des problèmes politiques et des problèmes infrastructurels qu'on met toujours au devant de la scène.
So in light of all these thoughts, we see then that the situation of Africans today is related more so to their linguistic position than really their political position.
Et une question se pose, est-ce que les pays africains ont aujourd'hui les moyens réellement d'abandonner toutes les langues européennes sur le plan pratique, est-ce que c'est possible?
And so the question now is posed, is it practical, is it possible for African countries to completely relinquish European languages? How practical is it for them to do this?
Oui, je vais juste prendre un exemple.
I would like to take an example.
Je suis originaire du Bénin.
I am from Benin.
Et notre langue officielle, c'est le français.
And our official language is French.
Alors, si nous abandonnons le français,
And so if we abandon French,
nous allons devoir retraduire tout ce que nous avons sur le plan pédagogique.
we're going to have to translate. This would entail translating everything from a pedagogical standpoint,
Sur le plan juridique,
in the area of laws, in the legal
sur le plan en fait, sanitaire, dans toutes les sphères de la vie publique.
sanitary field, in every sphere of life.
Alors, est-ce que nous avons les moyens matériels et financiers pour ça aujourd'hui?
And so, do we have the means to do this today?
Alors ça, c'est une question pratique que beaucoup d'intellectuels et d'écrivains ne posent pas. La question des langues africaines reste à un niveau vraiment abstrait.
And this is a question that many intellectuals do not grapple with. And so this question of changing languages remains a very abstract discussion.
Alors, utiliser les langues africaines, d'accord, mais comment? C'est là la question.
And so yes, using African languages is a good suggestion. The question now is how.
Alors, c'est sur cette base-là que je me suis reporté, je me suis inspiré du concept de négociation chez Umberto Eco.
And this is, and I was inspired by the idea of negotiation by Umberto Eco,
qui propose en fait la traduction comme un processus qui permet de concilier deux.
and who sees a translation as a means of reconciling two
deux positions, enfin opposées, deux situations opposées, une situation linguistique conflictuelle, deux situations.
Two conflicting linguistic situations.
Alors, dans cette présentation que je n'ai pas le temps de
And so
présenter
in
comme je
this
voudrais,
presentation that I'm not able to give as I intended to,
je voudrais faire intervenir aussi la notion de psychomogénèse chez Gregory Bateson.
I would like to refer to the idea of psychogenesis given by
Gregory Bateson,
Gregory Barthelson,
qui est un anthropologue américain.
who's an American anthropologist.
Pour voir aujourd'hui et montrer que, en fait, le problème des langues africaines, on n'avance pas sur la question des langues africaines.
To show that there is no progress in this question of African languages.
Non, que nous n'avançons pas sur la question des langues africaines. That we are not going far. That we are not advancing. No? Oui, c'est ça, oui. Sur la question, non pas parce que la question, c'est une mauvaise question, la question est légitime. Nous n'avançons pas parce que la question est mal posée. Le problème est mal posé.
And we are not making progress simply because, not because it is not a legitimate question, but because the question is not posed appropriately.
Alors, je me demande, la réponse à la question des langues africaines et de la manière de gérer le statut linguistique des pays africains pour l'avenir, c'est d'abord de se demander ce que veulent les Africains aujourd'hui, ce que veulent les peuples africains aujourd'hui.
And so I feel that the way to proceed is to ask the question, what do African people today want?
On constate justement que les gens veulent apprendre l'anglais, les gens veulent apprendre le français, les gens veulent apprendre l'espagnol, le portugais, parce que c'est justement à travers ces langues qu'ils ont une certaine possibilité d'accomplissement social, de promotion sociale.
We see that people in Africa today want to learn English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, because through these languages they are able to advance in society.
Et le dilemme, c'est qu'ils sont aussi contraints d'utiliser leur langue nationale dans une certaine sphère parce que les contraintes sociales les y obligent.
But at the same time, they find themselves obliged to use their native languages in certain social settings.
Alors le concept de négociation que j'introduis, on pense peut-être que c'est une négociation d'abord au niveau du problème des langues africaines posé entre l'Occident, les langues occidentales et l'Afrique, mais c'est d'abord en fait une négociation avec nous-mêmes. une réconciliation avec nous-mêmes.
And so this question of negotiation initially is seen as a negotiation or reconciliation between Western and African languages or spheres. I am saying that this is actually a negotiation that has to happen within ourselves as Africans.
Pour nous demander ce que nous voulons au juste. Et la réponse, qui n'est que personnelle pour le moment, c'est que la seule voie d'issue, la seule voie de sortie, c'est de parvenir à une certaine synthèse, à une certaine comme possibilité, pour employer un terme de Leibniz, entre les langues que nous avons aujourd'hui, les langues européennes, dont nous ne pouvons plus nous débarrasser, et les langues nationales que nous utilisons. Alors la question, c'est, je reviens à cette question-là, comment le faire? C'est la question qui demeure.
So finally, for me, my answer would be to come to a situation of bringing together, reconciling or combining all of these languages within ourselves, within our experiences. And I continue to ask the question, I return to the question of how is it that we reconcile these languages in the African sphere?
Et c'est la question que je voudrais vous poser aussi.
And this is the question I would like to ask you today, to present to you today.
Thank you. Spanish is el español lengua de hermanamiento y configuración identitaria. Spanish as a language of brothership. It's not instrument, hermanamiento.
A vehicle?
Huh?
Is a vehicle?
Vehicle, I don't like vehicle. Hermanamiento, I prefer the hermanamiento. Hermanamiento is brothership. Brotherhood. Yeah, brotherhood. I don't vehicle, no. Brotherhood.
Because we have to translate to present it, so it's hard to translate the word.
Brotherhood. Oh, brotherhood.
Yeah. Lengua de hermanamiento, okay? Y configuración identitaria. Huh?
The configuration of brotherhood.
Yeah. So we have three contexts. ¿Qué pasa?
La traductora.
Vale, puede. Vale. Tenemos tres contextos.
We have three contexts.
Otro contexto y otro contexto. Entonces, yo hablo del contexto África, del contexto América del Norte y del contexto América Latina del Sur. Son tres contextos.
Africa, North America, and South America.
Entonces, yo quiero casar estos tres contextos. Quiero hermanar esos tres contextos.
I want to bring these three contexts together.
Entonces, aquí tenemos África, tenemos este continente que ustedes conocen. Aquí está Guinea Ecuatorial, un país que tiene como lengua oficial el español.
This is the African continent. Here is Equatorial Guinea, whose official language is Spanish.
Y aquí está la República Árabe Saharaui Democrática, que tiene también el español.
And also Democratic Republic of Sahara, also.
Y seguro que si preguntamos a una persona adulta normal, ¿qué países africanos tienen el español como lengua oficial? Respuesta perfecta.
Certainly, if we ask people, any grown people, which African countries have Spanish as their language, they'll respond.
Okay. Entonces, dejamos África por un momento, vamos a América del Sur, ¿sí? Y tenemos 19 países que tienen el español como lengua oficial. Eso lo sabemos todos.
19 countries in Latin America speaking Spanish.
Okay. Dejamos esto, vamos a Norteamérica. Y, bueno, cuando digo América del Sur Latina, incluyo México, incluyo México, Cuba, etc. Vamos a Norteamérica, los mismos epónimos, los mismos nombres de estado, de muchos países, de muchos lugares de Estados Unidos, indican que ahí ha estado España.
Many indications of names in the United States indicate the presence of Spanish-speaking peoples.
Entonces, por ejemplo, Los Ángeles, San Diego, San Francisco, dice San Francisco. Los Ángeles, San Diego. No, digo San Diego, San Diego. No, dilo bien.
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Lo dicen con acento americano. Vale. Bien. Entonces esto ya lo sabéis. Bien. Pero, ¿por qué hablo de hermanamiento? Para hablar de este hermanamiento tenemos que pensar ya en esto. 3 círculos.
In order to talk really fully about this relationship, we need to think about 3 concentric circles.
Sí, 3 círculos concéntricos. El círculo primero ponemos a España.
Spain is in the first one.
¿Vale? Ponemos ahí España. En el círculo segundo ponemos América del Sur o Latina y África.
In the second circle, South America and Africa.
Y en el círculo tercero ponemos América del Norte. Y podemos también poner Filipinas, que ya Filipinas ya... ¿Vale? Bien. Pero ¿qué pasa aquí? Aquí es donde yo quiero ir. El español hablado aquí es un español originario, ¿sí? Del lugar, ¿sí? Es un español del lugar. El español hablado aquí no es español del lugar. Por ejemplo, el español hablado en América del Sur o África no era de allí, ¿vale? Pero el español hablado en España sí era del lugar, ¿sí?
The Spanish spoken in Spain originates in Spain. Within Spain, Spanish spoken outside of Spain is not necessarily from there.
Entonces, ¿qué es lo que hermana a estos 3 contextos? Digamos, la lengua española.
What binds these 3 areas together is the Spanish language.
Pero este hermanamiento es, aparte de un hermanamiento lingüístico, es un hermanamiento cultural, porque España llevó su cultura, sí, pero también es un hermanamiento psicológico.
It's a bond that is psychological, above and beyond linguistic and cultural.
¿Por qué? Porque estos contextos han sufrido la misma violencia cultural, militar, etcétera, por parte de España.
These areas have suffered the same violence, military, same military and cultural violence originating in Spain.
Sí. Entonces, a pesar de esa violencia reconocida, estos, América del Sur, África y América del Norte, se han convertido en dueños y propietarios también del español.
Despite this violence and origins, these 3 areas have become also repositories of Spanish language and culture.
Con una diferencia. Aquí, en el centro, existe una institución que protege la lengua, la Academia Española de la Lengua.
With one difference, which is that in Spain exists the Spanish Academy,
Sí.
which protects the language and the linguistic aspects of Spanish language.
Borro África, la parte africana. En Sudamérica, América Latina, existen instituciones que también protegen la lengua, que son academias.
In South America, there are also academies of the language that also dedicated to protecting.
En Norteamérica también existe una institución que protege el español. Es la Academia Americana de Lengua Española. ¿Vale?
The same in North America.
Es lo mismo.
Is another institution.
Excepto África. Por eso lo he borrado.
Except in Africa. No such thing exists.
Estos 2 países no tienen ninguna institución que proteja la lengua. Por consiguiente, este hermanamiento, el hermanamiento entre estos 3 contextos, es un hermanamiento desequilibrado.
For that reason, i.e. the lack of an institution in Africa, the 2 African countries speaking Spanish, it affects the bond between all 3 of these areas.
Es un hermanamiento
and so it's a binding that's out of adjustment.
Entonces, prueba de ello, prueba de ese desequilibrio es España, escritores famosos, premio Cervantes. Sudamérica, bueno, premio también de literatura. Sudamérica, escritores famosos, premio Cervantes, por ejemplo, Gabriel García Márquez, premio de literatura, el último, Mario Vargas Llosa, premio Pulitzer de 1990, por ejemplo, Hijuelos, ganó el premio Pulitzer en los 90, premio Pulitzer en ¿cómo se llama? Juno Díaz, ganó también el premio Pulitzer, muy famoso en Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Pero eso...
There are literary prizes, the Pulitzer Prize in North America, and the Cervantes Prize awarded for literary creations in North America and South America, but there is no such equivalent in Africa.
Y esto es lo que yo estoy trabajando ahora, es decir, ¿hasta qué punto podemos hablar de hermanamiento por la lengua? Hablamos de hermanamiento por el sufrimiento psicológico, pero no por la lengua, porque la lengua está reconocida en América del Sur, América del Norte, España, evidentemente, pero en África todavía sigue siendo una lengua extranjera. Muchas gracias.
We can talk about the bonds that exist between these countries in terms of psychological condition, but not in terms of the literature or the language.
Gracias.
Est-ce que le groupe qui croit, qui se considère créole, est-ce qu'il se sépare de la question de race?
Let me translate the question.
Would you like me to say it in English?
Oh,
I'm sorry. The group that consider themselves to be Creole and work on a Creole perspective, do they separate themselves, or does it separate itself from the question of race?
Was that my question?
Yeah.
Oh no. Was it on creative?
Oh yeah, you okay? Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry, it must be that I had a long day. Yes, your question to
answer if you want to.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously, that's a very interesting question, because well, I interviewed Confiant himself, one of the 3 members of the Creolity movement. They refute the idea of Creolity being related to race, because actually you see why they went after Césaire for that notion of relating negative to race. What is negative, what is black. They saw it more in terms of culture, more cultural than racial. And they saw it more in terms of going after anything that's pure, like pure black, or pure white, or pure Asian. And somehow there's something that really makes sense in his mind, that after 500 years of whatever happened, it's hard to just identify himself as black. And the problem is now, would everybody in Martinique identify him or herself as Creole? It can be problematic too, because if you remember recently when that Hilda Point talked about the goodness of slavery, that everybody was aggravated. It means that this small minority of Beke living in Martinique would not identify themselves as Confiant. So yes, for Confiant, it's not racial, it's cultural. But although when it is cultural, it's still an uphill battle, because not everybody identified himself that way. Césaire, he did not until he passed away. He never identified himself as Creole, and he's from Martinique. Even Maurice Condé went against that notion of Creolity. I don't have the exact answer, and I even don't think they have the exact answer, because although if they try to give us an answer, they're leaving us with many unanswered questions. That's how I call it a cultural labyrinth. Like we asking questions, trying to get answers, but still in the same part, not getting out of it. Yes, but it's definitely not racial for him.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I don't mean to monopolize.
Yes.
I think any ideology is, in a sense, historic, and by that I mean it's related to the time and history, space, time, and history. And ideologies evolve with time. So maybe that's why you say they don't have an answer today. Still,
I mean, they have an answer, and the answer is creolization. But
yes, but for instance, you gave the example of Césaire, who until the very last minutes he did not consider. So this is to say that ideologies evolve with time.
It does, because all the position that Césaire had, he had it because he lived in France in the 1930s, where although he came from a French colony and later from a French department, later being a citizen, there was huge conflict between nationality and citizenship. That's another way.
Okay. I wanted to make a comment to each of you. I really enjoy being at Howard because I don't get this intellectual enrichment anywhere else. Francis, when you were talking, I thought about one of the premier historians in BBC gave this rant about the fact that how Jamaican English was bastardizing the British English language. And he was talking about how it is imposing upon, and he was really saying what the British National Party is saying. These people are destroying us. And I thought about what you said, the fact that with language, especially with us, it fracturizes us to a great extent, but also we pose a threat to many people. And to the second speaker speaking about the Negritude, who's at this book about the Negritude? You. The Negritude totally missed mainstream African Americans because it was an intellectual movement, number one, and it was in French. And African Americans still have little access to foreign languages. And we were needed, but we weren't included.
But they did not miss it.
No, we did.
No,
we did.
Renaissance was not an extension of Negritude, or at least
these were intellectuals. These were black intellectuals.
Yes,
they weren't. We
but
weren't.
The Harlem Renaissance movement was not inspired.
Let's have the wife, please.
See, I'm an African American, and I'm telling you, the mainstream African American did not partake in the Negritude. The Negritude leaders were speaking French. They were African Americans still have very little access to French. The translations, for me, are still very difficult. So we missed that movement. Now you can say, okay, you had Richard Wright, we had all these people. These were intellectuals.
But
they didn't walk amongst the rest of us.
You know, La Ruby Dumont.
S'il vous plaît, laissez. Are we finished?
Then I had another comment, but okay. It was for
other people who want to.
I'll go briefly for the third speaker. You were talking about the African languages needing to translate for science. Latin, which is the basis for science, is merely a bastardization of most African languages. The Greek gods and the Roman gods, their names were bastardized from African languages. That's the irony of that. They took from us. Okay, then they incorporated and they managed it into something which was meaningful, but actually it came for us. And you were the last, you were the most esoteric as usual, okay, speaker, and I appreciated that. But when you were talking about what you were drawing, the relationships between the three, with Spain being the core, it is the same with Britain. You have American English, you have Welsh English, you have all of these Englishes. But the British Library houses, the British Museum houses the British Library. And that's the same thing that Spain. You have to remember, Spain, France, England, and Italy, they were all together in the African slave trade. They have the same focus, that is to make their language primary and to psychologically dismantle us. And they're successful.
No, I want to make a comment.
I have
question for you and one for Abraham. To Abraham first. A short, brief anecdote. I was at the University of Benin, and I visited the laboratory of ethnobotanists, who has immense collection of local flora, who went systematically to people who knew and who were speaking Fung or Yoruba for this, the catalog is immense. Why? First, he has the duty, if he wants to publish everything in French, to translate what the information he had about these plants, their habitat, use from philosophical description into French. That was a vast array of knowledge that are indigenous to Africa exists, that we have not even done anything about, that are accessible to a scientist. So when you talk of translation, what choice do we have to collect those and translate them into the European languages first, and then teach them to upcoming youth in the European language? So that's a dilemma. And then in your presentation, you focused on Spanish, right? Is it deliberate? Because Brazil's economy is probably larger or as large as the economy of the rest of Latin America put together. And Portugal is in the same situation as Spain. Indeed, the Portuguese-speaking countries go together to reform the orthography of Portuguese and virtually give a mandate to Portugal to ratify what they agree upon. Portugal delayed, and Brazil and the others ratify it, so Portugal has no choice. So how do we create, if you like, cordiality, if you like, linguistic cordiality, and Spanish, and leave Portuguese out, if we must. And Lusophone is across the continent, Atlantic.
Sí, gracias. Quería pedir perdón porque había mesas al mismo tiempo, así que llegamos tarde, perdón, conferencistas. Quería preguntar sobre este concepto de hermandad lingüística desde tu propia experiencia, pero no sé si lo has dicho, no solamente eres escritor, sino también catedrático, ¿no? O sea, entonces, en la experiencia de la sala de tu clase, ¿cómo se negocia esta hermandad entre españoles que asisten a tus clases? Tal vez algunos africanos de tu país, seguramente latinoamericanos también. ¿Cómo se negocia esto? Porque los países que mencionaste, cuando uno llega, dice, soy africano, hablo español, y te miran así, pues que ahí se habla español también, ¿no? ¿Dónde lo aprendió? ¿Dónde lo aprendió? ¿No? Y somos muchos en este caso, ¿no? A veces nuestros compañeros de Guinea Ecuatorial también nos dicen, pues ¿dónde aprendió? Siendo africano también como los demás, ¿no? Por eso me importa que usted pues diga sobre su propia experiencia como docente en la sala de clase, donde tal vez los tres polos o más están, ¿no?
Could you share with us how, in your experience as a teacher, your model of language bond?
Vamos a terminar porque se nos da el tiempo, es el último panel. Hay una cuestión, la cordialidad de la que usted habla no existe. Aquí existe una relación de poder, y el poder está entre Brasil y Portugal, a ver quién gana. Entonces, si nos fijamos un poco, el poder en Brasil es un centro neurálgico desplazado. No es el brasileño normal el que gobierna, es el portugués desplazado. El portugués desplazado acolectalmente, digamos, reconocido, ¿vale? Lo mismo pasa en Sudamérica, o en Norteamérica. ¿Quiénes gobiernan el español? ¿Quiénes controlan la lengua española? O españoles que han venido aquí, o sudamericanos, digamos, todavía no, o sea, que son representantes del poder lingüístico. Entonces no hay relación cordial, es una relación de poder. Si hablamos de mi experiencia en España como profesor, evidentemente al tener unos alumnos homogéneos, monolingües, tengo que, como profesor pagado por su sistema, entonces tengo que adaptarme a lo que hay, y es una relación de poder entre ellos y yo, es decir, yo represento su sistema y yo tengo que utilizar, digamos, el poder de su sistema. En ningún momento puedo mencionar África, lenguas africanas, porque no forma parte de mi programa, no lo forma. Entonces estoy como aislado en una isla, totalmente. Entonces no hay, porque si tuviésemos en España, los que habéis estado aquí lo sabéis, si tuviésemos un 10% o un 5% de alumnos africanos, quizá, pero ni siquiera tenemos un 0,1% de alumnos africanos en toda la Universidad Española. Entonces no podemos, digamos, buscar ese hermanamiento lingüístico entre África y España. Por cosa de los que habéis estado en España, sabéis que a España no le interesa en absoluto lo africano.
First of all, let me say that there's no such thing as linguistic cordiality, much as we might like to think so. It's simply a matter of power. Given that the examples that we have from Brazil and in Spanish in the United States are ones that involve displaced Portuguese in the case of Brazil and displaced Spaniards in the case of the United States. Myself as a teacher, my experience has been that I have to adjust myself to the students whom I have before me. These students are basically not interested in hearing about Africa. Africa does not enter into my curriculum or my program when I'm before the classroom in that situation. If we were maybe 5 or perhaps 10%, then it offers a possibility of a different conversation. But in fact, in all of Spain and all of the universities, we are less than 1%. So this changes the dialogue. So it is simply a matter of power.
Actually, I just want to make a last point to his presentation. I come from a bilingual region of Spain, and we have the problem in the age of globalization is to speak Spanish or to keep our language as Catalan, and that's what you say. But we have to be practical too. Do you want all the children in school be bilingual, trilingual? Many regions, things are not so easy. Many regions have more than one language, and you have to decide, you want the majority language to speak, or you want the children to speak English, that's even more majority, or you want to be have your local language. So I actually understand your point of view that it's the people who have to decide in our days.
I want to tell something. You know about the African cultural chat? Yeah.
That's
you know
what
about
I quoted in my presentation.
About the statement of indigenous people, which was approved by the United Nations, I mean, 2 years ago, statement talking about ¿cómo se llama esto? The right of indigenous people in the whole world. So it's not a reason when we don't use the African languages in our context in our schools. It's not a reason. We can use our languages. We can use African languages because we need, as I told someone in the auditorium, we need to learn how to become an African. But we are not African. Because if I speak Spanish, French, English, Portuguese, and no African language, I would not be African. Never. So my how do you say it? My mind will be French, American, United States, but never, I would never be African. So we need to protect our languages. We need. It's not expensive. They say that, oh, you have in an Africa, in only one African country, just like Nigeria, you have more than 600 languages. Which language can you use? In Cameroon, we have 400 languages. You need 1 or 2 languages. You can use it.
4 languages.
Which one?
Yeah.
In adding to the dialogue, as I said, it's always good to see African people discussing the issues affecting Africa, because that's the best way we can come up with the solutions we have. One, being from Harlem, from my observation in that environment, I know Africans who speak 20 languages, and at any moment in time they can break into any one of them. Now, what I find also, the Africans who can speak 20 languages, they are fluent in all the European languages, the dominant European languages, be it English, French, Spanish, or Portuguese. Now, the thing about it is that it then brings one to that realization that language becomes easy to children. You can actually teach a child more than 20 languages, and they'll be very proficient and fluent in those languages as they grow. So what we should be doing where Africa is concerned, I hate hearing people talking about, well, Africa can't unite because they speak French here, they speak English. That's ludicrous. What you need to have is a curriculum or a system in place where you teach our children all our African languages, including those international ones. When I say international, it's just that if you're out of Africa, if you're in England, you can speak English. In France, you can speak French. In Spain, you speak Spanish. But we should never cut our legs off or throw ourselves away trying to embrace someone else, and then in the process lose ourselves. So we have to be confident as African people in that we are the masters of languages. We create language and give it to the world. So we don't want to lose that essence. We should be embracing that. And as we say, if we're pushing for a united Africa, it is possible. It's not the languages that will hinder us, it's just the will to do so. So I think we should...
All the developed countries I know are developed with their own language.
Yeah. So we as Africans, with all the multiple languages we have, we too can develop. And I think it gives us an advantage, because one of the things I realized, I only know to speak English, and if I don't speak anything else, is the broken one you call it. Which the Englishman wants to say, we're not damaging it. Remember, they are the ones who brought it to impose on us, you know. We remember they took us against our will from Africa. So if we are using it in such a way where the slave master can't understand us, let him go to hell. We are talking among ourselves.
Okay. I want to say something I want just to say,
Okay, say what you were going to say. Say what you're going to say.
You know about multiple languages.
Say it quickly, because about the mic, things about to end.
I don't know. It's a very, very, very complicated issue. And I know people are really, I don't know,
passionate.
Yeah. If it comes to this issue, they are all... I was like this at the beginning, but I come to just to notice that...